Botrix has correctly joined the channel. Halo C6. OMG Best Nova in live.
Hasn't been working this entire time! Bro, I'm gonna kill myself. Professional streamer, by the way. I was talking, yapping my ears off. I look over, bro. I didn't see any of my mic shit moving, bro. Oh, I'm gonna end my actual self right now. Goddamn program. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm not the best Nova. I'm just really good at using those specs. Real, honestly. Oh my god, I almost fucking died.
GG.
I looked away from my screen for like half a second and almost died. Oh! Because not only am I running all-out attack right, I'm also running the a really old event Kazarka statue, so I have even more like I think negative DP.
I thought you grind with Awaken as well.
It's really rare, and it really depends on the spot. Like if I was grinding like orcs, right, or Elvia orcs, right, I'd probably use Awakening there. Because they're not really, like, strong enough for it to matter, and it's kind of really wide open areas, so, like, I want to be able to move around way faster than I would on stuck. But, like, if I'm, like, just doing Degia shit, or, like, King, I'm using Succession, bro. Like, here, to give you an example, let me, alright, buddy, hold on. Here, let me give you an example of why I like using Succession over Awakening in PvE, right? Check this out. Alright, can you stop being a cuck? Yeah, that's why you died. Alright, so just pay attention to this. Watch how many buttons I press when I'm just spreading my normal, like... Like, look how little I'm pressing things. And you think I'm about to grind on like a 3.5 APM class? Nah, dog. You got it wrong. And I still average like 16k trash here.
BTW so 6 thanks for guide on your VID, gonna sleep 12 AM in here.
By the way, thanks for your guide on your video. There's a few guides, but no problem. I made them. If it was for like Succession Nova, I don't know. The whole reason I even made the Succession Nova guide was specifically because like I remember Strega made a guide, but that motherfucker just overcomplicated these damn classes way too much. I'm like, dog, it is happening, but you do not need to overcomplicate this shit. Like shit, most people trying to look at Suck Nova to potentially reroll to are really just looking at this class to see, is it easy? Does it do damage? Is it good in PvE? Is it good in PvP? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, cool. Bro's over here throwing 2-page long combos. I'm like, what? Christ. Literally the entire combo for Suck Nova. Side dash, shift RNB hold. Side dash, shift F, shift U. E. Side dash again, shift E. Forward C. Down RNB, don't get CC. And then shift RNB, same thing, over and over and over and over and over again. It doesn't change. And then you can integrate like shift C. PvE and PvP. I don't think I've done an Awakening PvE one yet.
No, I mean on Awakening PvE and PvP.
No, I don't think I've done one for PvE yet. If I did, it was probably the older one. But I know my like most recent update is mainly for PvP. You could utilize it for PvE, but the only real difference for Awakening Nova, like PvE, PvP wise, is PvP, you're basically spamming all your abilities, and basically not long casting them. Like you're basically just using them for either re-CCs or debuffs to build up to like big damage drops. Versus like PvE where you like full cast everything basically. Alright, hang on. I gotta turn my other AC. Shouldn't it be overflowing by now? Surely it turned. Oh my god, bro. I swear to god, it's like the fourth one of those guys I've killed in a row, and I haven't got the overflow yet. You genuinely think of this? I like this thing. There it is. Wait, I just realized something. No, Nova's got it. Okay. I was like, I was trying to think. If there's a certain outfit if like Nova got it or not. And then like I like wake up, got this outfit. Yeah, okay. I was like, I swear she has this outfit.
starting in 5 minutes.
My first fragment? Oh my god, it is. Bro, this spot blows. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I'm like co-pachungus grinding here. Realistically, because one of my buddies last night pulled a fucking full arm to drop here, and I'm like, alright, bro, find you on something. So I'm just coping at this point.
3 minutes. 20 now.
Oh my god. Why did that scare me, bro? Oh my god. That actually scared me. What the fuck, bro? I kinda jumped in my chair. I'm self-sabotaging myself at this point. Oh my god. Tsuda, thank you for the sub. YouTube subscribe, I appreciate it. Ayo! Why? Oh my god. Just died there. 100 DSR delay.
Why are you grinding Ash Forest?
I'm mainly grinding Ash Forest because I'm coping because my buddy got a hard drop, but it was one of the EVA artifacts, and I'm like, I kind of need Dekia fragments too for the EVA ones. I'm at like 30. But I'm really just grinding here out of this pure cope chungus. I ain't gonna lie to you. This is just straight up cope. I'm so pissed off this motherfucker got a hard drop. I'm like, alright, bro. I might have to go over here and try and see if I get one. Oh my god. Oh my god. Hey, oh my god. Funny enough, I think I've grinded here about 8 hours the past 2 or 3 days. Still no necklace. I haven't gotten one fucking necklace from here. I'm like, bro, this place just sucks. Like, I at least average a bill an hour based off like trash, but like overall, it's just my god. Can these spirits stop giving me back shots? Holy hell, bro. Oh, fantastic. It's nice and fun right here. Oh, thank god. It overflowed. Ugh. Holy shit. Oh my god. Fuck. What is it? Dandelion bug? This place kind of blows just because kind of average only like 2 fragments an hour. Even with this amount of drop rate, it's so stupid. Pretty sure I'm at like 340 right now. Wow, that is super cool. Okay. That what the fuck is this Luna? Poor karma. Oh, real. Alright. Another coach on this hour out of the way. 15.5k. Kinda trolled myself because I was AFK a few times this hour. And yes, I know there's a horse stable guy here I can sell my trash at, but I'm kind of tired. Digging 2 fucking ash forests. This place blows! This place sucks! Dude! But I ain't a group grinder. bro, it's so crazy. So in Japan, there's a bunch of homes they actually have that are like abandoned, usually in like rural areas, which isn't too bad. But like, dude, they like sell them for like 4, 5, 3 grand. It's like, oh my god, dude, you tell me I can go to Japan and be a homeowner? Dog, it's over. That can't be good. Okay. I saw a flashlight. I got scared. Where is that one video at? Ah, there we go. Alright, let me watch this.
The manga begins with a man intensely playing a video game, trying to take down the boss, which he managed to do with the help of his friends. Suddenly, he immediately felt intense pain, leading to him falling to the floor. Up until then, the man had lived a good...
Oh, bro, Isekai, my favorite. Just kidding. Boom. Yeah, Primordial Martina Soul. I gotta fill. Oh my god, I actually gotta fill this. Holy shit. This bitch empty. Fuck you want? What? How much is it actually? Plus 25 plus so 100 minus 50 divided by 10. Jesus fucking Christ, that is so AIDS. Okay, so 100 minus 50, so 50. Oh, it's 15 for 5 hours. That's so retarded. Bros gave me a math equation. What the fuck is this? say allegedly. It allegedly opens in a minute.
Life. The doctor told him he only had 3 years to live because they had found a heart disease for which no cure had been found yet. The man's chances of survival were pretty much zero. They warned him that the next time he had a heart attack, he would die. The man decided to quit his job and poured all his energy into his hobby, a VRMO called Broken Balance Online, commonly known as BBO. The man ended up becoming one of the strongest players on the server. Due to his illness, his reflexes and speed could no longer catch up to the others. However, his knowledge in BBO was still second to none. When the day finally arrived for him to fully use his knowledge and manage to beat a boss considered impossible for the next 3 years, he really wished that he could have lived longer to witness the events after. As he could barely use his fingers, the man used the very last of his strength to inform his colleagues that he was very grateful to them. After closing his eyes and accepting his demise, he was surprised to wake up in a bed. Memories came rushing to his head, and he then realized that he was reincarnated in another world with the memories of his past life. The man's name was now Eldo, the 4th son of a lower noble in a remote area. His family didn't think of him as a person, and the only person who spoke to him was his oldest sibling, while the rest of his current family just ignored him. Eldo could only guess the reason for their treatment was that, after he was born, they had 3 years of poor harvest, which eventually led to him being branded as the god of pestilence. Due to Eldo being underage, his parents couldn't kick him out of the house yet. However, he would be turning 15 the next day and would officially become an adult. After undergoing the coming-of-age ceremony, Eldo would be officially banished from the city and be on his own. Knowing these facts, Eldo was far from being hopeless, as the world he was reincarnated into was just like the game he used to play, Broken Balance Online. Aside from the coming-of-age ceremony, magic skills and jobs also existed in BBO, jobs that are similarly told in fantasy stories like Magician and Swordsman. Even the skills they use are the same as BBO's. An example would be a swordsman's first skill they learned was Whirlwind Slash, and for magicians, it was Magic Ball. Eldo was able to confirm that the skills also worked the same in BBO when his older brother was bragging to him about it. Eldo's current job was Novice, as the name suggests. It's a job for people who don't actually have a proper job yet, and the Novice was the weakest job. Trying to test out his theory, Eldo cast a low-level recovery magic called Self-Care. After confirming his theory, Eldo realized that the system of the world was the same as BBO. However, there was a crucial difference from BBO. The general population had an overwhelming lack of knowledge in magic and skills. An example would be the skill he just cast. Self-care is not a very powerful skill, but since anyone can use it and has low magic consumption, it was still very handy. However, Eldo has not seen anyone use the skill ever. Eldo's unfortunate reality just became a blessing in disguise. Rather than being stuck and staying at a noble's house, Eldo would rather get kicked out and become much stronger. Furthermore, he has the most vast knowledge regarding BBO, which makes it easy for him to survive. His older brother then visited him, asking how he feels for tomorrow's coming-of-age ceremony. His brother was surprised when Eldo told him that he does not want to undergo the ceremony. Even after reassuring him that the cost would not be his worry, Eldo was still persistent in not pushing through the ceremony. There were 2 ways to get a job. One was the coming-of-age ceremony, and the other was to get the job at the Royal Capital's church. The large church of the Royal Capital had a fairly superior performance compared to the other churches. One could get a high-level job unlike the others. Eldo's older brother warned him of the precautions of his decision, and he may end up becoming a novice all his life. Eldo understands his brother's warning. Instead, he asked a favor of him to inform his father of his decision, since if it was Eldo that were to inform their father, then he would just be ignored. After knowing Eldo's decision, his father woke him up the next day and immediately kicked him out as soon as he woke up. Leaving his home, Eldo was only left with a shabby sword and 10,000 gil, which was the same as 1 yen on Earth. As he was about to get out of the city, Eldo was surprised to see his brother waiting for him. When his older brother learned of Eldo's plans on becoming an adventurer, he gives him 100,000 gil and advises Eldo to make sure that he gets a source of income before the money runs out. Realizing that he was lucky to have a good older brother, Eldo refuses to accept the money and tells his brother that what he has was enough. After saying their goodbyes to each other, Eldo left the city and decided to go to a city with a guild established. Before heading to the Adventurers Guild, Eldo hoped that he would not encounter any demons since the only weapon he had was a shabby sword. After looking at his surroundings, Eldo immediately made contact with a monster. A novice's enemy detection ability is low, so whenever a novice detects an enemy, so do the demons. Eldo could only wonder if the demon would let him run away to ask for help. The demon in front of him was one of the weakest demons called Wolf. As his first battle in the New World, being careless was not an option. Eldo still remembered the sensation of swinging a sword in BBO. The most important part was always the player's skill. Eldo focused on everything he had learned from BBO, which made it easy for him to take on a demon even if he was a level 1 novice.
The story began when Luke opened his eyes after hearing a strange sound. Suddenly, he was kicked in the gut by a hero named Falcon who insisted he wake up immediately. Falcon asked where the repel amulet was since Luke was asked to set it up in the middle of camp. When Luke confirms that he did this, Falcon points him in the direction of the food and asks him to explain. When Luke looks over, he's shocked to find that their food has been plundered and eaten. Before Luke gets beaten up some more, he insists he doesn't have a clue what's going on. At this, the hero explains that because Luke put the repel amulet in the wrong spot, their packs were outside its area of effect. He then calls Julia, another hero in the team, and asks how much food they have left. After she takes stock of what's left, Julia sadly announces that even if they're careful, they won't have enough to make it back to the surface once they're done with the mission. The loudmouth hero immediately corners Luke and asks how he intends to fix this monumental screw-up. But despite Luke's attempts to defend himself, Falcon tells him his excuses won't be enough to get him off the hook. Just then, Luke points out that the rocks he stacked at the center of the camp were still where he placed them, unlike the amulet. This means that the amulet must have been moved after he set it down. Luke even remembers that Falcon had been thirsty the previous night and went over to the packs to get a drink, so he asks if he might have knocked something over when he did. Falcon began stuttering and admitted that it's possible something like that might have happened. Luke then concludes that if that's the case, he shouldn't go around pointing fingers like that. Suddenly, a wicked voice called out from behind to activate a paralyzing spell. The effect of the spell was directed at Luke, who was caught by surprise and wondered what could possibly be going on. As the rest of his body stayed in place, his eyes turned to see who had done this. It was the oversized chest sisters, Blanc and Noir. Blanc insists that the
Golden
only thing
Pig
that
Cave
matters is
has
what
been
happens
opened.
next, forcing her sister, Noir, to agree. To Luke's horror, Blanc suggests that if there isn't enough food, they will need to reduce the size of their party. She then looks Luke dead in the eye and calls him a prime candidate for sacrifice since he is a third-rate millman. Falcon praises the girls for their genius idea, and Julia confirms that the food should be able to last if rationed properly. They agreed that ditching the deadweight whose only skill was repair wasn't much of a loss, while Luke watched on helplessly. Then, as a final act of so-called mercy, Falcon leaves him a sword and greets him goodbye. Hours later, the paralysis wears off and Luke's body is finally set free. In his despair, he admits that he is a third-rate adventurer because for 15 years, he's been a D-rank and the only skill he can use is repair. But even though no one would miss his sad, meaningless, and pathetic existence, he knew their party had gone too far by screwing him over like this. However, Luke was determined not to roll over and die, and as he stared at the dark abyss, he promised himself he'd escape the dungeon no matter what. When he stared down at the swords the hero left as a rude joke, he figured it would at least be good enough to keep him safe. Luke was nowhere near powerful enough to fight his own shadow, let alone monsters, so he simply planned to avoid drawing attention to himself. Even if it took him a few days, he vows to move carefully and quietly till he gets out of the dungeon. 2 weeks later, Luke pants loudly as he laments about how hungry he is. He hasn't eaten a single thing till the time he sets off alone and is only alive thanks to the magic he knew while in the caves. He passes by a skull on the floor that seems like a warning of what he'll soon become. Then he remembers hearing that half the people die in the dungeon because they can't bear the hunger and end up eating the poisonous lightning that grows on the walls. He decides he needs to hurry it up, hoping to find another adventure party when something begins to rattle behind him. Suddenly, a skeleton man runs up with a sword and tries to unalive him, but Luke manages to react quickly and knock it down before they become 2 skulls on the ground. As the pile of bones crumbles into a pile, Luke heaves a sigh of relief that there was only one of those. However, when he turns around, he sees his sword is completely broken. Unfortunately, he's all out of iron powder, and repairing his sword so many times has obviously made it brittle. Frustrated, Luke tries to repair his sword, but it ends up breaking into even more pieces, leaving barely anything left. As Luke stares in disbelief, he wonders if his repair failed, but the sword suddenly springs up and takes its original shape. Luke is relieved to see it reform, but he wonders what just happened with his skill. According to what Luke once heard, the repair skill momentarily decomposes both the object in need of repair and the virgin material, then restores them to their original form. As he thinks about it, he walks toward a wall and starts to get an idea. Back when he was with that treacherous party of haters, the hero had once tried to break the wall with his sword, but Julia warned him it was a waste of time and was unlikely to work. The hero had assumed they could progress faster if they broke the wall, but because of how hard it is, it was only likely to damage his sword. However, he figured he could just get Luke to fix it again, if that happened since he was useless in every other way possible. Back in the present, Luke places his hands on the wall and activates his skill. To his surprise, a large crack runs through a circular portion of the wall and causes it to crumble before his very eyes, forming a hole going all the way through. Luke celebrates his achievements, remembering that not even the arrogant hero could do it, but he pulled it off effortlessly. As he inspects the broken parts of the wall, he realizes it seems more like metal than rocks, and when he feels how hard it is, he concludes it's hard enough to destroy his enemies. Suddenly, Luke wonders if his repair skill must have evolved even though he doesn't know how or why. However, he realizes that if it has, he might be able to use it for other things. Even though it seems too good to be true, he grabs the broken sword from the skeleton and activates his skill to repair it into a full sword. Repair can't repair something out of nothing, and for the skill to work, it requires an identical virgin material to compensate for the broken portion of an object. And if there's none, like in the case of the sword, chipped portions are repaired using unchipped portions. However, this is why repairing without spare material makes your weapons brittle. In addition, not every material can repair every object, and you at least need a similar material to the broken portion. But now Luke wonders if it is possible to use anything as a raw material. He figures that if he could repair a sword with material from a wall a hero couldn't break, it would make the strongest sword in the world. When the repair takes, he thinks of what to try it on and spots the skeleton's sword. He places it in between some rocks to keep it upright, and then he uses all his might to strike it. The second sword breaks in two, and Luke is happy to see that there isn't even a scratch on his blade, which means he can use it to survive long enough to escape the dungeon. He immediately grabs some of the rubble from the wall to take along and plans to keep using his skill to make holes till he finally exits the dungeon. As he proceeds, he wonders if his upgraded skills could possibly work on the lightning. He grabs some of the wall and activates his skill, but aside from the loud sound of crickets, nothing else seems to come from using his skill. Luke realizes that living things can resist magic because they have an innate resistance to magical meddling. However, since that's the case, he decides to hold the activation for a little longer than usual. This time, Luke gets the lichen to decompose, but concludes that it's not very efficient. Either way, repair doesn't work on living things, and he doubts he'll ever have to use it on humans. Hours later, Luke uses his skill one last time till he spots a bunch of stairs. He excitedly runs up with his labored breathing until he sees the sky and tastes freedom. Luke begins to rejoice when his stomach rudely interrupts his celebration. He realizes he can't go without food much longer and searches to find something to eat when he spots some berries nearby. Relieved, Luke rushes to eat the berries, but when it gets close to his mouth, Imaginary alarm bells go off in his head, and he realizes the fruit is rotten. Luke tries to figure out how he knows this without tasting it when a piercing scream rips through the air. Luke immediately reacts and runs toward the direction it came from, wondering if someone's there. Suddenly, he sees a girl named Sakura being useful for the first time as she holds a sword up and tells her sister Sylvia to get out of it. Luke figures they're in the middle of a fight, but can't see who it's against till giant claws appear on the tree, which could only belong to one dangerous creature. In that instant, a dragon fully emerges and stares down Sakura and Sylvia. Luke trembles with fear as he wonders what it's doing there since dragons never leave their dungeons. Suddenly, he notices Sakura has a terrible injury, and her sword is broken, so she can't possibly fight the dragon in her state. Luke decides he has to do something and grabs one of the rubble pieces he brought along. He chucks the piece at the dragon, which brushes against him like a fly, and has zero effect whatsoever. At this, Luke calls out to Sakura instead, and tosses her his sword to use. Sakura catches it and assures him she's in his death as she faces the dragon head-on and cuts through it once. Luke and Sylvia are amazed that she actually did it while the dragon collapses to the floor dead. Luke and Sylvia rush over to Sakura to ask if she's okay, so Sakura manages to thank Luke for his help, but just as she says these words, she begins to lose consciousness. Luke holds her up and desperately tries to wake her, while Sylvia calls out for her, concerned. Luke sees how bad the injury is and says it looks fatal, so he turns to Sylvia to ask if she has any healing skills, but she shakes her head in disappointment. She asks Luke if he has any, so Luke explains that his only skill is repair, but it wouldn't work on a person. Suddenly, he freezes for a moment and remembers something important. He wonders if his last statement was really true given what happened to the lichen back in the dungeon. Even though everyone knows repair can't heal living things, he was able to decompose living lichen. The skill dismantles virgin material and the target area of the repair to restore the original form, and even though he doesn't know the effect it would have on a human, he figures it's worth a shot. He asks Sakura and sees she hasn't been given any first aid, and neither he nor Slyvia has any healing skills. He decides that if he just calms down and remembers what he did back in the dungeon, there's a chance it could work, but if he left her bleeding out as she is, she would definitely not survive. When Luke makes up his mind to give it a shot, he tells Sakura not to hate him if it doesn't work, so Sakura weakly tells him she can't and encourages him to do his worst. At that, Luke stretches out his hands and activates his skill. However, his hands begin to shudder, and he tries hard to hang in there just a little longer. He realized that in 15 years, he'd seen countless adventurers sustain serious injuries. He even watched some of his comrades scream like little girls that they didn't want to die, but he couldn't do a single thing to help them. Those were his limits as a third-rate waste of sperm, but he never wants to feel any of those things again. Unlike the scumbag party, he hasn't stooped low enough to abandon someone in need so with everything inside him. Luke channels his power towards security. Some hours later, Luke wakes up in a strange room, wondering what happened. As he sits up, he realizes he must have passed out right after using his skill, but after looking around, he wonders where he is now. Just then, Sylvia comes in and is happy to see he's awake. She informs him she's in her home, which happens to be an inn, and he's been asleep for almost half a day. Luke apologizes since he has no money and tries to leave, but Sylvia assures him she doesn't need any money from him since he saved their lives. Luke insists he didn't really do anything that fantastic, but thanks her for her kind words. He then asks how Sakura's doing, and Sylvia says she's perfect and made a full recovery thanks to Luke. Luke is relieved to hear this since he'd never sleep again if someone he tried to help died. Just then, Sylvia asks if he's an exceptionally strong healer, but Luke explains that he's actually just an E rank with a repair skill. As Sylvia wonders how his repair skill was able to pull that off, Luke's stomach begins to mimic those dragon noises. Luke hunches over and says he might be dying since he hasn't eaten anything in 2 weeks, so Sylvia says she'll fetch something to eat right away. Moments later, Sylvia serves up a steaming bowl of food, and Luke swears he never tasted anything as good in his life. As he eats, Sylvia tells him that she is shocked, as she never thought someone would come to save her at the bottom of the dungeon. When Luke hears this, he becomes confused while Sylvia wonders what's wrong. Luke asks her what the name of the place they met is, so Sylvia says it was the E-rank forest, Sundial Forest. Luke repeats the name in further confusion and asks what kind of dungeon it is. At this, Slyvia describes it as an open-type dungeon similar to a big amphitheater. On the other hand, Luke knows he was in the ranked dungeon called 1,000 Passages to Hell, which must mean the levels of the two dungeons were linked. When Sylvia says they went down there to get herbs, Luke points out how dangerous it is for novices to go in there and wonders how no one stopped them. Sylvia explains that the Sundial Forest was only recently recognized as a dungeon, and people had always gone there to gather herbs and vegetables. However, Luke points out that if it was recognized as a dungeon, that means there were dangerous monsters inside like the dragon they encountered. But Sylvia says they had no idea, and the guild didn't post any warnings either. Luke asks if she's sure that the guild wasn't aware of something that huge, but Sylvia promises that they weren't, and the guild person she told couldn't believe their ears either. Luke would understand if the lack of notice was for a weaker monster, but he just can't imagine the guide failing to mention a whole dragon. Luke agrees that it couldn't be helped and apologizes if it sounded like he was blaming them, but Sylvia says it's fine since she knows he was just worried about them. After this, they both officially introduce themselves as Sylvia of the Spring Leaves Inn and Luke of the White Wolf Wood, and Luke notes commoners don't have family names, so they usually attach the name of their birthplace or trade. After, Sylvia asks why Luke was in the dungeon too, but when she looks over, Luke is back in dreamland topping Deep House. Deciding not to wake him, Sylvia covers him up and thanks him for helping. The next morning, Luke feels more alive as he takes a hot bath. Once he's done and refreshed, he gets dressed and heads outside to explore. There, he realizes the whole place is like a relaxation resort with lots of food stalls and restaurants on the street. As he looks around, he hears his name from behind, and when he turns to see who it is, Sakura walks up, relieved to see him looking well. Luke remembers her name and asks how her wound is doing too, so she explains she was able to make a full recovery faster. They begin talking about the events of the dungeon, and Sakura says she might not have needed help if her favorite katana hadn't broken. Luke asks where her sword is now, which catches Sakura off guard. Sometime later, she delivers both pieces of the sword, which Luke announces is great because he'll be able to fix it. Sakura is glad to hear this, as there's no weapon shop in town, so she's been stuck without a sword. Just then, Luke glances to the side and asks what's up with Sylvia. This startles her, and she apologizes for eavesdropping, asking if he minds her watching. Luke says it's not exactly riveting enough to be missing work, but Sylvia says it's fine since she's on break. Upon hearing this, Luke grabs onto the sword to get started, but is shocked at what happens next. Just by touching it, he suddenly knows all the information about the sword in his mind. He realizes something similar happened when he almost ate that rotten berry, but somehow knew not to just by touching it. Since that part of his skill has also evolved, he figures he'll name it analysis. His ability now allows him to analyze the condition of what to repair, decompose the parts needed for restoration, and then recompose them back together for a successful repair. As he repairs the sword, he realizes each individual stage of the repair process has become its own independent ability. Seconds after, Luke hands over Sakura's sword and says he's all done. Sakura praises him for how incredible he is at repairing, while Luke's head swells, even though that's the only skill he's capable of using. Sakura insists on paying him, but Luke tells her not to worry about it, figuring that she probably doesn't have much money because she's just a warrior in training. When she remembers her empty bank account, she humbles herself and thanks Luke for the freedom. Since Sakura is broke and jobless, Luke suggests giving adventuring a try. He explains that she can take on quests when she wants and choose her jobs on her schedule, so Sakura says it sounds perfect for her current situation. Luke confirms from Sylvia that there's a guild house in town, and when Sylvia says her childhood friend even works the front desk, Luke says he needs to drop by the guild for some business. Later, they arrive at the guild and head to the adventurer's registration desk. There, the receptionist, Merida, welcomes them and asks what Sylvia is doing there this time of the day. After hearing Sylvia's recommendation of Luke, she asks if Luke is there for a quest or to register with the guild. Luke explains that he's already an adventurer and says Sakura's the one who would like to join, so Sakura bows her head and asks to be let in even though she is a novice. However, Merida assures her everyone around there is a novice because the danger levels are so low. She pulls out a form and asks Sakura to fill it up and consider it her first step as an adventurer. As Sakura fills out the form diligently, Luke smiles at her, remembering when he did the same 15 years ago, but is somehow still a broke loser now. Now that he thinks about it, he's not sure he was as eager as Sakura and everyone else in this guild though. Merida explains that adventurer ranks go from F to a rank, but everyone starts out as F rank regardless of their ability. F rankers can't participate in dungeon raids, so they need to complete a group of simple tasks to rise to rank E. Luke averts his gaze as she explains that E rank is the lowest real adventurer rank, and the guild will evaluate you and decide when you can progress to the next rank. Sakura asks what the benefits of ranking up are, so Merida says the higher the rank, the more dungeons you can enter and more quests to take on. Dungeons are also ranked from A to E, so adventurers are only allowed to enter dungeons equal to their ranks or lower. But for parties, dungeon levels are based on the rank of the leader. Finally, she advises Sakura to rank up so she has more choices when she suddenly notices something strange on Sakura's form. She turns back to confirm something while Sakura wonders if she left anything out. Merida then asks if Sakura was the one who slayed the dragon from the 5th dungeon level the other day. When Sakura confirms this, Silva apologizes for not telling her earlier. Merida explains that once they report this to their main office, Sakura will get a cash bonus, so Sakura thanks her for the news. Merida then adds that it's a pretty amazing feat to be able to cut down a dragon in one hit, but Sakura insists she's just a beginner and was only able to pull it off because of the amazing sword Luke gave her. As the conversation continues, the men in the background begin to pay attention. Luke gets nervous that they're drawing a lot of attention, while Sakura insists that she'll split the prize money since she didn't slay the dragon alone. Luke admits that even though he keeps hearing Sakura say it, it hasn't sunk in yet, but there's no reason he shouldn't get some benefit from this. He confesses that he'd like to take a break from adventuring and asks if there's a place in town where he can set up a weapon shop. All the adventurers immediately listen to Luke's conversation, since newbie adventurers wouldn't ignore the rumor that the guy who made a sword that slayed a dragon in one hit is setting up a weapon shop. Luke asks for the best building to use, so the woman hesitates to tell him about. Luke says she can use his portion of the reward if money is the issue, but she explains that the building is falling apart like your last relationship. Upon hearing this, Luke says there would be no problem at all since repair is his area of expertise. Suddenly, Sylvia asks Merida if she's referring to that dump on the outskirts of town, which is beyond safe, but Merida says they can't just allow it to rot. Luke starts to sweat a little as he tries to convince himself that he can fix it, so Sakura tells him that if that's his plan, he can have her share of the reward as well. Luke tells her she should keep the money for herself, but Sakura insists she'll be earning more money as an adventurer anyway. Luke hesitantly says he's grateful as he figures nothing he says will change her mind anyway. Sylvia then suggests they make it an advance payment for urgent repairs. Sakura asks if he's willing to accept the money as payment for his service and adds that she has one other request. She asks Luke to make her a katana just like his sword, which is strong enough to slay a dragon. Luke feels more comfortable agreeing to his arrangement, and they officially form a contract, making Sakura his first customer. Sakura excitedly agrees and tells him she's counting on him. With this one deal, that's how Luke took a break from being a deadbeat adventurer and started his new life as the owner of a weapon shop. Later, Luke goes with the girls to check out his new building, which turns out to be a dumpster fire. Sylvia explains that it's been vacant for a while, and one day a strong wind brought a tree down on the building, and now everything inside is broken too. Luke figures he won't know what is possible until he tries. When Sylvia asks what he means, he explains that he's never used his repair skill on something this big, but he remains hopeful. The target area for his repair is the entire building, and he plans to use the fallen trees for the parts that have rotted. Luke then places his hands on the floor of the building and activates his skill, causing a wave of energy to emanate from him. Sylvia begins to hear cracking sounds all around the building, while Sakura is amazed to see the building actually fixing itself. In a matter of seconds, Sylvia announces that Luke has restored the building completely. She goes to tell him he's amazing till she sees him looking like he needs life support, even though he claims he's fine. Sylvia begs him not to push himself since he's still recovering, but Luke says he's already begun advertising and wants to open up shop as soon as he can. The girls are worried about him collapsing again, so Sylvia offers to clean the place while Sakura says she'll help too. As the girls start cleaning, Luke heads over to the shop stock, which is all broken weapons and armor. As he activates his skills and starts repairing them, he points out how other people's junk is his treasure, just like you to your girlfriend. Sylvia stares in amazement as the sword now looks brand new. She understands that it's cheaper to repair broken items than to stock the shop with new ones, which is why a weapon shop is perfect for Luke. As he pulls out a wretched sword, he says the last thing they need is a real eye-catching display. He reminds Sylvie that he used the sword that slayed the dragon for publicity, so if he doesn't have weapons like that, they'll be disappointed. Sylvia wonders if he'll really be able to make more swords like that, but Luke only intends to put replicas in the shop. Luke realizes that after disintegrating the material he picked up in the dungeon, making another sword with the tiny bag of powder would be impossible. Sakura asks if the powder is the same one he used for the blade, so Luke confirms it, but says his acquisition channels are a trade secret. He then activates his skill on the sword, which begins to return to its original form. Sylvia points out how beautiful it is, with the shine being very different from the other swords. Now all that's left is to repair the rest, but he still needs to figure out how to procure materials. Sakura says she could have never thought this was the business he had with the guild, but Luke gave it a lot of thought. He explains that from what they told him, there's no weapon shop in town, but the thing newbie adventurers need the most is weapons and armor. Sakura then points out that he was an adventurer up to this point and wonders why he stayed an adventurer when he had an amazing repair skill. Just then, Luke realizes he never told the girls what happened to him before they met, so he explains the story and adds that he only realized he could do this recently. After hearing the story, the girls can't believe how awful his party was and rain down curses, while Sakura says she'd have cut the little twerp down if it were her. That aside, Luke admits that the reason why he wanted to keep being an adventurer was longing. When he was a kid, a party of adventurers would come through his village, and hearing their fantastic adventures put a seed of longing inside of him. Even though they were probably capping for most of them, he couldn't shake that feeling of longing. His parents treated him like he said he wanted to quit law school to become a rapper, and it was so bad that he ended up leaving his village because of it. That's why he kept going, even though he was a worthless E-ranker with almost no point in being alive. Sakura looks at him worried that she might end up a loser like him, and asks if he regrets it, but Luke says he doesn't regret it 1 second because he truly enjoyed being at the bottom of the food chain. However, his last quest was a rude wake-up call from the universe to get a fresh start. Then again, he can thank that quest for his new abilities, and now he can live a quiet life as a weapon seller. Upon hearing this, they all determine to work hard and get the shop ready. Sometime later, Luke looks through his list of things to be done when he hears a man call out to him. It turns out to be a man who looks like he ate Harry Potter, who says he knows Sylvia's family very well and heard that Luke saved her from the dragon. He then offers Luke a box of treats on the house, so Luke asks if he's sure he doesn't want anything in exchange for it. The man assures him it's a treat and says a lot of his customers are really looking forward to his shop, wishing him good luck. Luke goes red when he realizes no one ever expected much or gave him anything before. He enjoys the feeling along with a taste of the treat. Meanwhile, Sakura runs into some kids who want her to show how she plays with long swords every day. Sakura doesn't think it's appropriate, but figures doing it once more time wouldn't hurt anyone. At this, she tosses a plank in the air, pulls out her sword from its sheath, and slices through the wood like a hot knife through butter. The kids stare up in disbelief, but their minds aren't the only minds blown, as Luke is also amazed that she was able to perform 2 slashes in an instant, which needs both speed and technique. He figures she really is a skilled swordsman, as he suspected. Sakura brags that that was a piece of cake, but Luke wonders what happened to the woman who said swords shouldn't be played with in public. When Sakura turns back and spots him, all pride in herself leaves her body. She rushes over to ask Luke how long he'd been standing there, so Luke informs her he heard the whole comment about swords. Sakura goes red as she explains that displaying their skills in her home is a no-no, so receiving praise is very rare for her. Luke understands and hands her some of the treats he got for free from the stall. Sakura thanks him and begins munching away at the treats which she realizes are so good. Luke teases that she really likes eating, so she laments always getting humiliated ever since she met him. Luke says it's important to let go at times, so Sakura thanks him for saying so, as she grew up in a very strict family and tends to let go way too much when she's in places like this. At this, Luke asks if she's planning to stay in the area since she's a warrior in training, but Sakura says she's returning home for a short visit and will be leaving tomorrow. She explains that she wants to make this town her home base, but to do that she needs to collect something she left back at home. When Luke asks more about it, she says it's a special material she wants him to make her katana with. Luke realizes he'll be making her sword only after she returns, so he promises to surprise her with the most amazing shot she's ever seen when she comes back. In response, Sakura smiles and says she'll be looking forward to it. Days later, a handyman calls out to Luke and asks where he wants his sign put up. Luke calls back to him and confirms where he wants it while Sakura stands nearby. After this, posters go up across town to announce the opening of the weapon shop. Sylvia asks if he named his shop after his birthplace, White Wolf would, so Luke admits that he couldn't think of anything better. He then thanks Sylvia for all her help, like making sure his eyes never get tired of staring at her chest. Sylvia assures him that it's fine since he did save her life after all, but now she points out so many people are waiting excitedly for him to open. Luke smiles to himself and agrees that this is where it all starts. Finally, the handyman looks down from the roof and informs Luke that the sign is all set. Now, with the last of the preparations complete, he and Sylvia stand in front of the shop and welcome everyone to the grand opening of White Wolf Arms. Some weeks later, Luke realizes that even though it hasn't been long since he opened his shop, he gets lots of business and has gotten used to dealing with customers. Just then, a man asks if Luke has a sword that can fit his budget of almost nothing, and sure enough, Luke points him in the direction of several swords made for the monetarily challenged. Later, Luke finishes attending to them when a bottle of wine lands on the table as Sylvia walks in, not surprised to find it busy as usual. She then explains that the bottle is a present from Merida, as everyone is overjoyed from growing more powerful thanks to the materials harvested from the dragon's corpse. Luke is surprised to learn that's what it's for, though she adds that it's also a belated shop-warming gift. Sylvia spots the swords on the wall and sees he hasn't sold any of his featured replicas yet. She figures that they aren't exactly priced to sell quickly, and the average guild member couldn't afford one. She then points out that these are only replicas and asks if he could charge even more for the original ones, to which Luke assures her he can. He says he can probably charge several gold coins for it, as he pictures the cash raining down. Sylvia insists that it's as much as average folks make in a year, but Luke explains that he can't make another one so easily. He would have to go back to the Orank dungeon of hell, which means going with an Orank hero, so for now, it's basically impossible. Sadly, he can't collect more of the material, and he's not in a hurry to sell it. Plus, he figures there aren't any adventurers with that kind of cash to drop on a sword. Just then, the door swings open, and two men walk in, one blonde and the other with dark hair. The blonde one asks to confirm if Luke is the owner of the store, while the other man asks if this is the shop with the famous Dragon Slayer sword. When Luke confirms that it is, the blonde asks if the sword is available so he can buy it. Luke points them to the swords on the wall and says similar replicas are available, but the blonde insists those are just poor quality replicas, but he wants the real deal. However, Luke informs them that he hasn't put the original blade up for sale. The blonde explains that he has reasons for wanting the blade and asks his colleague to show him the money. The large oaf then pulls out 5 gold coins, causing all the other customers in the store to marvel like money is the 8th wonder of their world. Even Luke begins to sweat as he stares at them, and wonders who on earth the man is to offer 5 gold coins so casually. When the man worries that the 5 coins aren't enough, he motions to his colleague again, so he drops 5 additional coins and asks what he thinks of this offer. Moments later, the door slams shut as the men exit the shop, leaving Luke and Sylvia exhausted by the tense negotiation. Sylvia counts the gold coins again to make sure she's not dreaming, then asks how 2 adventurers could afford this. Luke says no adventurer could shell out that kind of money, but they might have been knights or noble emperors. He then points out that the blonde seemed to be a real connoisseur since he saw right through the quality of the replica swords. They agree that he couldn't be an ordinary person, but wonder why such a person would come to their town when the door suddenly opened. Just then, Sakura walks in and says it's been a while, so Sylvia runs to her and says she was getting tired of waiting since it felt like forever. On the other hand, Luke felt she was back earlier than expected, so Sakura says she really wanted to show him the material, which is why she came straight here. Luke suggests they take a look at it once they're done eating, so they all take a break for lunch. Once the food is served, Sakura starts stuffing her mouth and praising Sylvia's cooking as the best she's ever tasted. They even catch up on other news as Sylvia reveals that Luke's been hired to restore some of the buildings in town too. Sakura says the shop is even better than she imagined, and when she points out that he's getting a lot of customers, Luke adds that some aren't even adventurers. This is all because he fixed the condemned life hazard of a building, which is his biggest advertisement. Sakura praises Luke for doing well for himself, and assures him he'll make his starter fees back in no time, but Luke shyly says he's already earned most of it back. Sylvia asks if she remembers the sword Sakura used to defeat the dragon, and explains that it had just sold for 10 gold coins. However, they all wonder who on earth those men were and figure rich people must just want tools that come with lots of prestige. Sakura's eyes glaze over as she insists she'd be set for life with that amount, but they tell her she's just exaggerating. However, they can never know the truth behind it, so they decide to focus on Sakura's blade instead. Sakura places a special jewel on the table and says this is the material she wants for her sword, which they call Hihai Irikane. Luke says he's never heard of it, while Sylvia points out how it is red like a gemstone, even though it's actually a metal. Sakura then reveals that one of the goals of her journey was to find someone who could forge a sword out of the material, as no one in her village, or even in the East, knew how to make any new tools from it. Luke asks if she's sure she wants to entrust him with such a precious metal, so she says there's no one she'd rather entrust it to. However, Luke explains that the process is complex and will take a bit of time, which Sakura is surprised to hear from the goat of sword making. However, Luke explains that the skill he has is repair, so he can't just make a sword out of the material right away. Sakura realizes he can't create a blade from the metal ore alone, but Luke says it's not impossible. He could recompose half of the ore bit by bit into an existing katana until it learns the shape. Then he can decompose the katana along with the rest of the ore and recompose it all. If he does that, he'll be able to make a 100% Hihai Irikane blade, which is sort of a cheap workaround. Sakura gets excited when she hears this and asks if it'll really be possible, so Luke explains that the theory is sound, but he's never actually tried it, causing Sakura to ask him to do it as soon as he can. She hands him her katana and asks him to make a 50% version of the Hihai Irikane katana first, and then after, make a 100% version. Luke assures her that if that's what she wants, he'd better not fall short of her expectations. He gets to work on first making a 50-50 split of the Hihai Irikane and the katana. As the girls watch, they're amazed by the technique along with the pretty colors. As they stare at the sword, the girls comment that it has a pink color, so Luke explains that combining the ore with regular metal makes it lighter. Sakura asks Luke if he minds her taking it outside and giving it a try, so Luke tells her to knock herself out as long as she doesn't stab his other customers. When she leaves, Luke laughs at how much of a big kid at heart Sakura is, so Sylvia teases him for sounding like a dad. Outside, Sakura lights her finger on fire, but explains that it's only a low-level skill, so she can't use it for a direct attack. But they say that items made with Hihai Irikane conduct fire and amplify its intensity. With this, she sets the blade on fire and plans to see if the process works by testing it on something. Luke suggests a block of wood and tosses it in the air, warning her to watch out for the shop window, so Sakura swings her sword, which creates a wave of fire that burns through the area she slashes. The other customers outside narrowly escape meeting Gojo in heaven as they stare at the scorch marks in the ground. Sakura then tells Luke that her sword is incredible, while the other adventurers consider giving up on their adventure dreams thanks to her. Luke and Sylvia stare at her speechlessly as Sylvia wonders if Sakura really thinks that's a low-level skill. However, Luke sweats and realizes that he might have just made the most overpowered weapon since Death Knight. He then stared at the area of impact and wondered just how strong it would become if Sakura used a higher level of firearm. Luke can't imagine he was actually capable of making something like this, because not long ago he was E-ranked cannon fodder who was happy to join a hero's team as a pack mule, only to be tossed away like a cookie. As he stares at his hands, he realizes how unreal it feels for someone like him to make such a weapon. Sylvia praises Luke and says it's just what she expected from him, pointing out how thrilled Sakura is. Sakura then asks Luke to make her a short sword next time, so she can dual wield with her katana. Luke also never thought that he'd like friends who appreciate his skills like this, so this motivates him to work even harder and tells Sakura to leave it to him. Later, a customer thanks Luke for his help and promises to come back if his sword breaks again, so Luke assures him he'll be waiting for his business. When he's done work, he heads out for a break, but he continues to burn with creative energy as he can't wait to return and fix more weapons. He remembers that Sakura said she wanted a short sword, so he plans to make it now and surprise her with it, while also adjusting the ore ratio. Just then, some men in armor approach him and ask if he's Luke of White Wolf Wood, and if they could have a moment of his time. The short man named Garnet explains that they are the Order of the Silver Wings, but Luke's never heard of them. He then asks what they need and informs them that he usually handles repairs or requests at the shop. However, Garnet demands to know how long Luke intends to play dumb, as the evidence against him continues to mount up. Luke stares blankly for a second and turns around suspiciously to say he has no idea what they're talking about. Garnet then grabs Luke by his shirt, angrily telling him not to underestimate him. However, the bigger knight named Felix stops him and tells him not to interrogate him, or the truth will get twisted easily, but Garnet tells him to shut up. Felix then reminds him that he's the commanding officer and threatens to report the shrimp to their lord for disobeying orders. The shrimp demands they leave his brother out of it, while Felix apologizes to Luke for the rough treatment. At this, Felix removes his helmet and officially introduces himself as the vice commander of the order, asking if Felix can go with them to discuss a matter of great importance. Luke pauses and asks what would happen if he refuses to go with them, so Felix says that since that would be an obstruction, they'd have to do something worse than yanking his shirt. Luke gets the message and suggests they head to the shop since they stick out like sore thumbs in the street. But that's just when Sylvia notices them. She quickly walks up to Luke and asks what's going on, so Luke says he has no idea and is about to find out, but it doesn't seem good. However, Luke tells her not to worry since they're only going inside to talk, though Sylvia worries how she can possibly not worry with scary knights in front of her. Sylvia demands to go with him and asks the knights if they mind, but before she even gets a response, she rushes off to tell her mother first. Luke asks if it's really okay for a kid to tag along, so Felix says it's fine as she gives consent to be his official witness. Later, the group discusses inside and Felix asks Luke to describe each member of the hero's Falcon party that was inside the dungeon. Luke starts off with Falcon, the loudmouth, overconfident scum who would make mistakes out of pride and then use his skills to try and fix it. Then there was Julia, who was Falcon's childhood friend and lover and would even donate any number of brain cells he asked of her. The only time she stood up to him was when it concerned other women. Next was the white mage, Blanc, who was the evil witch who proposed they abandon Luke and always rubbed people the wrong way. As for the last member, Noir, Luke says he didn't know what to say. The girl had so little presence that he honestly couldn't describe what she was like. Luke asks why they want to know about them, so Felix says they might as well get on with it. He explains that Falcon and his party are currently missing in action, and the Order of the Silver Wings is investigating their whereabouts. Luke says he hasn't heard anything about that, and simply told the guild they were probably still in the dungeon, but he gets the shock of his life when he hears he's being suspected of foul play because he left the dungeon without his team. Apparently, the ministers sponsoring Falcon claimed that there is no doubt that the hero Falcon died due to betrayal by Luke, and the best course of action was to interrogate Luke for details. Sylvia interrupts and demands that it's an absurd accusation since Luke isn't that kind of person. However, Felix tells Sylvia to calm herself as he understands her feelings, but should be allowed to finish. Felix continues by saying the ministers believe Luke stole Falcon's weapon, so they were appointed to retrieve the Dragon Slayer sword. At this, Luke looks at one of the men and recognizes him as the same man from the day he sold the sword, Bradford. He now understands why they had so much money, because it was a political assignment. Felix says the minister's reasoning was proved false. However, the sword Luke made contained mithril. Sylvia asks what mithril is, so Luke explains that it's a precious metal with a terrifyingly high magic affinity. One would need permission from the royal palace to gather it, let alone sell it. Sylvia then listens in shock as Luke reveals that the worst-case scenario for not doing so is the death penalty. Silver reminds Luke that he repaired the sword with the walls of the dungeon, so Luke says the cave must have been composed of mithril, but he couldn't analyze it because he'd never seen that metal before. Felix points out that since his production of a mithril sword was not intentional, he can't actually be charged. Luke then takes a hard gulp as Felix informs him that if he really made the sword from the dungeon walls, no one could have known there was mithril there. However, to prove his innocence, Luke must disintegrate a part of the dungeon wall with them as witnesses, so Luke agrees to do it to clear up any suspicions. Luke asks how they could possibly think he betrayed his party, but Felix assures him that only the ministers think that because, in terms of ability alone, it would be pretty impossible for an E rank to betray an O rank hero. Luke then points out that the shrimp outside Shore seem to believe he was guilty, so Felix explains that Garnet hates people who sell mithril illegally, which is probably what he thought of Luke. The next day, the knights plan to escort Luke to the dungeon to gather rocks from the walls. When Garnet spots him, he playfully calls out to Luke and tells him he's counting on him, but the total attitude change weirds Luke out as he wonders if the short king is bipolar. As the men shake on, Luke continues to feel something's off when Garnet suddenly squeezes his hand. Luke gets free of the little rat script while Garnet insists that they'll finally bust his eyes open. Suddenly, Garnet Garnet sees someone and tells them outsiders need to back off, but it turns out to be Sakura, and she insists that she's not an outsider since Felix gives her permission to accompany him. Luke tells Sakura he's fine and apologizes for making her act like both a bodyguard and a tour guide, but Sakura assures him she's always glad to help out, while Garnet scoffs at how typical E-Rangers always need someone to protect them. Felix interrupts and reminds Garnet that they've spoken about this, and if Garnet steps out of line, Felix will report him to their lord. Garnet quickly agrees and promises to be serious from now on, while Luke taunts him for finally listening to his big brother. Garnet wonders how Luke knows about his brother, so Luke reminds him of their first conversation where Garnet referred to his brother. Suddenly, Bradford, the oaf from earlier, informs them that the vice commander is ready to set off. So Luke apologizes for goofing off, while he wonders who spat in his morning coffee. Later, they arrive at the Sundial Forest with the dragons remains, so Garnet says that adventurers who go there in light armor are either courageous or plain stupid. Luke asks if he's wearing full armor because he's scared of whittle-overgrown lizards, so Garnet gets upset and screams at Luke to deny the accusations. However, Luke doubles down and tells him not to worry since there haven't been any reports of another dragon, further infuriating Garnet, who insists he's not scared. As Felix, Sakura, and the oaf watch them bicker in frustration, they realize they almost look like they could be friends. After they arrive at the entrance to the rank dungeon entrance, they wonder what it's doing in a place like that. As they head down the stairs, they're surprised to see it really links to the other dungeon and plan to investigate the lower level dungeon too. The men inspect the walls Luke says he used for the repair and agree that it does appear to be nearly stone at first glance. Garnet insists that if the walls are part of the dungeon, then the walls should be virtually indestructible, so Felix tells him to give it a go and Garnet happily agrees, warning Luke that if he knocks down the wall, then Luke is indeed a fraud. Luke tells him he's well aware and encourages him to do his best, so Garnet charges forward at the wall and activates his skill, which allows him to deliver a powerful kick with his leg. However, the dungeon wall remains intact, as if to mock the short king for having the impact of a fly. Afterward, Felix asks what Garnet thinks, so Garnet admits that its similarity to rock is superficial, when it's really a cluster of metal that even a hero couldn't break. After hearing this, Felix tells Luke to go ahead, so Luke agrees and bends down to get started. As he begins to activate his skill, he realizes coming back here takes him back to the worst moment in his life, so he plans to decompose a small part of the wall so they can all go home. After placing his hands on the wall, the cracks form around a circular portion like the last time, and even Felix is astounded that Luke broke the wall so easily. Next, Luke grabbed a sword and demonstrated how he recomposed his sword with the rubble, which is how he made the sword that slayed the dragon. In other words, he had no idea it was mithril. Felix tells Bradford to collect some of the rubble, which he agrees to, but Luke is annoyed to hear Felix suggest that he dismantle more of the wall at different points. Luke would really rather not go any deeper into the dungeon, but Felix explains that can't be sure of the composition of every wall. Garnet begins to tease Luke for being scared, so Luke threatens to abandon him to the same fate as him. A while later, they collect a bag full of samples, which Felix says will be enough, while Luke is finally glad to be out of the dungeon. Garnet asks Luke how he managed to survive in such a depressing cave for 2 weeks, so Luke irritably reminds him he wasn't down there for fun. Felix tells Luke they'll take the medal for appraisal, and though the tests might take some time, they'll contact Luke as soon as they hear anything. As they're about to leave, Sakura calls for Luke and suggests he take some of the dragon's remains back with him, which would act as a nice souvenir for the other knights. However, Garnet continues to walk off as he tells them to do what they like while he heads home. Luke asks if he remembers the way back, but Garnet tells him to stop bothering him by being annoying. However, before he can finish his sentence, a giant claw comes out of nowhere and slams right into Garnet. At that moment, Luke feels the blood splatter on his face and watches in horror as Garnet's helmet flies off his head and lands next to him. There are clearly pissed off dragon roars at the top of its voice, while 2 more dragons fly right behind it. As for Garnet, he lies motionless and face down on the floor as his blood pools around his body. At that moment, Felix tells everyone to run for it, so the other adventurers in the area begin screaming for help, insisting they don't stand a chance against the dragons. Felix quickly calls out to Bradford, who answers immediately and activates his skill. Suddenly, chains of binding appear from his hands and wrap around the bodies of the dragons as they growl and struggle to get free. Unable to free themselves, the monsters tumble to the ground at Bradford's feet, and Luke is surprised at how many he was able to take down with just one skill. Just then, Sakura dashes out of nowhere and lands on one of the dragons, ready to draw her sword. Before the dragon can even react, Sakura unsheaths her sword cuts through its neck like a thin sheet of paper and goes on to defeat the rest of the dragons with one slice each. When she lands on the ground with her back turned, a dragon begins to sneak up behind her, causing Luke to scream for her to look at. However, before the dragon can sink his fangs into her, Felix sets up a barrier shield to protect her. Sakura tells him she's in debt, but they realize the dragon before them seems different. Felix tells her he and Bradford will provide support while they leave the finishing blow to Sakura. Felix plans to draw the dragon in the left direction, so he tells Luke to get himself to a safe distance, and Luke hesitantly agrees. As he walks off, he feels pathetic because even though his skill evolved, he's still pretty much useless in combat. However, he resolves to do whatever he can as he spots Garnet, who's still bleeding out. Luke sees he's lost a lot of blood already, but he's still breathing, so he picks him up and calls out to see if he can hear him. But when he takes a closer look, he sees Garnet's face is almost completely crushed. Luke quickly places him on the ground, wondering if there's still time to save him if he ignores the armor and focuses on his body. Just then, a loud roar from the dragon echoes behind, causing a strong wind to blow in his direction. Luke can't believe that the dragon's breath is strong enough to reach all the way out there, so he figures they'll be in the range of a direct attack if they don't move, but worries about Garnet's condition. Luke becomes overwhelmed with frustration when he notices the mithril sword lying nearby and decides it's time to either sink or swim. He figures that he can have the repair target be the dungeon wall that he merged with the sword and use the earth as the raw material to compensate. At his, Luke activates his skill and creates a wall to protect them from the dragon's breath. He insists that as someone who was abandoned for being useless, he couldn't possibly abandon someone else who's on the brink of death. He figures the wall isn't so bad, especially since he hasn't tried it before. Then he turns to activate his skill on Garnet, and demands that Garnet better apologize for every time he chewed him out. He continues to work on repairing him, hoping that it brings him back, but when the repair finally works, Luke realizes Garnet is a she, and her grapefruit is hanging out for free. Garnet begins to open her eyes and suddenly sits up, finally remembering the dragon. She tries to rush over to slay the monster, but ends up staggering as Luke calls out for her. Luke tells her not to move since he can only fix her wound, but can't restore the blood she lost. But Garnet doesn't seem to know what he means. Suddenly, she remembers being hit around her chest, but when she grabs her grape seeds, she realizes she's been flashing Luke the whole time. She rushes to hide her flat surface as she screams at Luke for seeing, but he tries to explain he couldn't help it cause he had no idea she was a woman. Luke offers to fix her armor and tells her to turn around, and as he places his hand on her back, he realizes Garnet can be both a guy's and a girl's name, but he'd never have guessed it was Melons under her armor. Once Luke finishes with the armor, he says it should hold for now and suggests they wait for Sakura and the others to finish off the dragon. As they wait, Garnet asks Luke if he isn't curious about why she was hiding her gender, so Luke casually says he figures she wouldn't want him to know her reasons and doesn't intend on forcing her to spill. However, this response angers her as she screams out his last name, so Luke reminds her to take it easy or she'll pass out. To his surprise, the prickly midget bows before him and admits she owes him an apology. She struggles to get the words out as she apologizes for being rude to him before, so Luke asks if it was because she thought he was smuggling mithril, making her demand to know who told her. She then laments Felix sticking his nose where it doesn't belong, but Luke assures her she doesn't need to tell him anything she doesn't want to since she must have her reason. However, Garnet apologized and said she wouldn't make any excuses or her mother would unalive her for sticking to her pride. She calmly tells him she's grateful to him for healing her cause. She would have died if it weren't for him. Luke is surprised to hear this and had no idea she could be so forthright, so he tells her it's all under the bridge, even the part where he laid ideas in her tiny treasure chest. Garnet immediately restores the factory settings and tells Luke to forget about that no matter what, but he assures her he has bigger melons to fantasize about back in his shop. Suddenly, Luke hears a loud boom sound and figures the others must have defeated the dragon, but Garnet laments not having the chance to pay those monsters back. Luke then suggests they head back and meet with the others, and stretches his hand to ask if she can stand. However, Garnet glares at him with her cheeks red, and insists she can stand just fine on her own. He then asks if she's okay meeting the others with her helmet gone, but she tells him it's fine since Felix and Bradford have seen her face before. However, neither of them knows she's a woman because their order has a dumb old rule that only allows men to join. Luke remembers that even Felix has been referring to Garnet as a he this whole time, so Garnet tells him that's why she's been calling herself the commander's little brother and makes him promise not to tell a soul. Luke figures Garnet's reason for being in the order must be something major if she's willing to hide her gender, and even though he's curious, he decides it's none of his business and starts to head back. Suddenly, Garnet stops moving when something catches her attention, causing Luke to wonder what's wrong. She then points in a direction and asks if he also sees what she sees, which turns out to be a huge hole that they didn't notice on their way in there. They figured the plants beside it must have been the reason why, and were probably covering the hole when they passed through earlier. She figures something gigantic must have busted out while they were heading into the caves, which Luke agrees to. Garnet then suggests that the dungeon that appeared in the Sundial Forest might have come out of the hole, so Luke agrees that the guild wouldn't have noticed the hole there either. Luke says they'll have to warn the guild when suddenly the walls begin to rumble and the hole starts closing. Luke points out that it's a pretty common trap mechanism for a dungeon, but if the mechanism is out here, that means the dungeon must be part of the trap. Garnet asks if he thinks someone is controlling the dragon, and though Luke doesn't want to consider it, he figures that there must be a switch that would trigger that door. Suddenly, they spot a person right under the hole, so Luke tells Garnet to wait right there while he investigates. He quickly runs up to check if she's okay, and even though there's no response, a sign of relief shows on his face when he realizes the woman is still conscious. Just then, Luke realizes that he'd recognize those oversized milk bags anywhere and asks if it's Noir. He asks what on earth she's doing out there and says he heard the rest of the party never returned, so Noir suddenly begins to cry and apologize over and over again. Luke tells her to calm down and asks what happened to the others, so Noir is about to tell him something about the party and dungeon when she suddenly freezes and starts trembling from fear. Suddenly, Noir hears a voice telling her to be quiet or else she wants to suffer, and she remembers when she was in the throne room with the rest of the party motionless on the floor beside her. At that, Noir slumps right in front of Luke, so he calls out for her and tells her to hang in there, but the mysterious voice tells her no one will be able to free her from her curse. Some hours later, Noir opens her eyes and finds Luke, Sakura, and Felix staring down at her. Happy she's awake now, Noir asks Felix who he is, so he introduces himself as a member of the Order of Silver Wings, and Noir is shocked to hear that he's investigating the disappearance of Hero Falcon by order of the king. He asks Noir if she wouldn't mind telling him what happened to her, so she nervously tells them to look at something and begins to take off her dress. When she does, she reveals a strange marking on her back, and they wonder what on earth it is. Felix figures it might be a demonic curse mark, which is a spell demons and their ilks cast to control others. Based on the pattern, it blocks the sharing of information, which is why she couldn't talk about what happened earlier. Felix asks Luke if it's possible to remove the spell with his repair skill, but Luke Loki thinks she deserves the karma. Felix assures him that the part she played in abandoning him is unforgivable, but insists this was no time to hold grudges. Between the mysterious hole and Noir's discovery, it was possible their town could be in danger. At this, Luke informs Noir that while she and the other scum of the earth left him to die, his repair skill evolved, and he's now able to heal living creatures. He asks if she understands that not only can he heal her back, but he can just easily take her apart, sending a shiver down her spine. Sakura tries to call out to Luke, but Felix stops her from interfering. When Noir doesn't object, Luke tells her to brace herself and places his hand on her back to activate his skill. Immediately, the mark on her back begins to peel off and attach to Luke's hand. Luke realizes that it's no ordinary curse and is actually alive. Sakura asks what the disgusting creature is, so Felix explains that it's a mimic that usually waits for its prey disguised as treasure chests or dungeon rooms, but he's never seen one mimic a curse mark. Luke realizes the mimic is trying to sap his magic, but he doesn't intend to let it eat him that easily and activates his skill. He uses it to repair his right arm while he decomposes the mimic. It takes intense focus and all the magic he has, but he's finally able to reduce the mimic to a clump of glue, which he squeezes out of his hands. After this, Luke informs everyone that the curse mark is gone, while Sakura and Felix remind themselves never to get distracted by anything shiny.
Like hunks.
At this, Luke tells Noir to tell them everything she knows without leaving a single part out, as it seems danger is lurking close to their town. At this, she explains that after they abandoned Luke, they headed to the deepest part of the dungeon where Falcon used the secret password to gain entrance. Then, a door slowly opened and Noir was instructed to check the room out with her magic, so she conjured up a bird to investigate. Inside, they found an impossibly large cavern, and on the outskirts were great mines with dwarves enslaved by dark elves, while the inner lands were barren and home to dragons. At the time, Noir noticed a small town halfway across and informed the team that they would find the old man they sought them. This mission was because 2 months earlier, the dwarf's chief appealed to the king for aid, so the king sent Falcon on a reconnaissance mission, but they had to remain undetected by the dark elf. Suddenly, Julia noticed a large door and wondered what was up with it, since it couldn't possibly be for humans with how large it looked. Luke arrogantly assumed the password might work for this door as well and tried to open it, but it seemed pointless as nothing happened, and they decided to carry on. The next day, they finally reached the town and discovered only dwarves living there. Noir cast an invisibility spell on the party, and they kept moving on carefully and quietly. Eventually, they found the old man who welcomed them and said they'd long been awaiting him. The man informed them that the Dark Elves came out of nowhere and enslaved his people, but Falcon told him he already knew that. He figured they needed them to defeat the evil overlord, which he thought would be a piece of cake. Even Noir was shocked to hear this, because their mission was only to survey the area, but the old man praised him for being brave. When Blanc noticed the expression on Noir's face, she asked what was wrong, but Noir brushed it aside and said it was nothing. In reality, she had a terrible feeling about what was to come as the elf offered to show them the way to the dark side. That night, while Noir and the others were supposed to be getting some rest, Julia was getting the farm between her legs plowed roughly, making her scream Falcon's name in excitement. The idiots had apparently been together since before the party was formed, but the audacity to be bumping bellies this close to enemy quarters was astounding. Noir lamented how arrogant their hero was, which made her remember how Luke felt toward Falcon's massive ego, causing her to feel bad. Blanc moves closer and asks Noir if she likes listening to naughty ASMR, but Noir says she is actually lost in thought and wonders what Julia sees in him since he's a pompous jerk. Blanc suggests Falcon at least has talent, which is better than Luke, the worthless loser. However, when she catches Noir clenching her fists, she suspects something's up and goes to meet her. She then hugs Noir and tells her not to worry about Luke, so Noir agrees not to think about it just to appease her sister. The next morning, the party arrives at the entrance the old man described and plans to find the evil overlord and send him back to the underworld. Suddenly, a golem shows up to stop them, so Falcon leaps forward to stop him, but is suddenly surrounded by numerous guards. Blanc and Noir wonder what's going on since the old man assured them the entrance was lightly guarded, but it would seem he was lying. It was a one-sided battle from the start, and every victory just brought more soldiers to attack them. The fighting became increasingly violent, and Falcon had to keep repairing his swords when they got chipped. When Noir watched him, she remembered Luke always added material when repairing a sword as it would weaken without it, so Noir continued to get a bad feeling. After making it past the guards, they found the staircase to the throne room. When they arrived inside, Falcon arrogantly told the king it was time to meet his destroyers, but the king calmly asked if that was so. He introduced himself as the Dark King, Gandalf, and was shocked that such a small force could penetrate his fortress, which meant he'd need to revise his defenses later. Falcon began swearing as he told the elf to shut up while they stuck it to him. Gandalf called Falcon a vulgar potty mouth, and as he summoned the magic circle, he insisted that if that was what Falcon wanted, he'd leave him no choice. At that moment, Gandalf released a powerful energy beam toward the heroes, but Noir countered with a magic barrier of her own, saving the group as the blast couldn't get past them. Gandalf looked on with pleasant surprise and suggested he might actually have fun with that, but Falcon cheekily told him to enjoy it while it lasted, since playtime would soon be over. Just then, one of Gandalf's men named Norsley stepped forward with his sword to take over. Falcon insisted he didn't have time for a small fry like him, but when he struck his blade against the elf, it snapped like a toothpick. Falcon cries out for his sword, so the elf knight laughs his face off at the fool and tells him to prepare to die as he charges forward with his sword. However, Julia steps in front of Falcon, and unfortunately, her large melons aren't able to stop the sword from piercing through her, so she tells Falcon to use her sword instead. The elf knight laughed at how noble she was and told Falcon he would even give him time to grab the sword. However, despite Falcon's fury, the battle quickly worsened. Moments later, Gandalf had Falcon by the neck, while Julia and Blanc lay motionless on the floor. As the entire party lay around like trash, Gandalf wondered how they managed to cut through the golems like ribbons, but were unable to defeat Norsely. Upon hearing this, Norsely grabs Falcon's crumbled sword, and when he appraises it, he explains that the sword seemed to have suffered significant damage while fighting their troops. Falcon starts to get up slowly as Norsely announces that their battle was probably the straw that broke the camel's back. Immediately, Falcon starts yapping that loudmouth of his, demanding to know if he lost because he was too low level. He begins to wonder if he would have won the fight if Luke was actually still with them, but refuses to accept such a blasphemous insinuation. Meanwhile, as Noir lay on the ground, awaiting her fate, Gandalf approached her and stretched out his hands to leave the others a warning. During the process, Noir continued to scream in pain, causing Gandalf to warn her to shut it or else she'd suffer. After placing the curse on her back, Noir was locked up along with Julia and Blanc. Even though the guards gave them food and allowed them to wander freely in their cells, they couldn't escape the dreads that filled their hearts. First, they took Julia, and even though she acted like her foolish boyfriend and demanded to know where Falcon was kept, they gave her the silent treatment and took her away. Just when Blanc and Noir had grown used to being alone in the cell, they came for Blanc, who cried and cried, but couldn't do anything to stop them. Neither Blanc nor Julia ever returned, and eventually one day, they came for Noir too. As they escorted her out of the cell, she was sure that, like the others, she would never see that cell again. She was so weak with fear that her legs gave out, and she ended up falling to the floor. As her captors demanded she get off the floor, the entire prison began to shake, causing immediate panic. They ran off to investigate the cause of the quake, completely forgetting about Noir, who was still out of her cell. Even though she was shivering with fear, Noir knew she had to do whatever it took to get out of there, so she got to her feet and started running. She used the meager magic she had left to conceal her presence as she snuck around the buildings. She crossed the Dragonlands and returned to the entrance of the upper level of the dungeon. However, she soon reached a point that was heavily guarded, just as her magic gave out and she was no longer able to conceal herself. She began to cry, thinking this was the end of the road for her, but she suddenly heard the sound of wind, and when she looked to the side, she noticed that the large door that was shut earlier had been opened and was the source of the wind. Even though she had no idea where it led, her only chance of survival was to go through it, so she summoned every last bit of strength inside her and climbed the steep slope that was just beyond the door, and she kept going until finally she saw light. She was so overcome with joy to find an exit that she didn't realize she was at the edge of a cliff and ended up falling to the trees below. It all went black for her, and she figured she was going to die, upset that she wasn't able to save her sister after all. However, just as she was about to succumb to the darkness, she heard voices, and to her utmost surprise, the person she saw before her was someone she never thought she'd lay eyes on. After the story, Noir takes a nap to recover from the trauma of reliving that twice. Luke says he doesn't know where to start making sense of that, while Felix says they'll need to request backup from the king. Luke is surprised Felix trusted him not to hurt Noir, so Felix reminds him that he managed not to disintegrate Garnet after all. Suddenly, Sylvia rushes into the room and tells Luke to come with her for an emergency. Down at the guild, several merchants throw tantrums complaining that they're getting fewer patrons thanks to the dragon sightings, and insist the guild do something about this. Merida is overwhelmed by all the complaints, so when she spots Sylvia and Luke, she quickly asks for their help. Since the guild manager isn't around either, the merchants turn to Luke and ask if it's true that another dragon appeared. Since most of the adventurers in the area are E-rankers, powerful enemies like dragons would keep showing up. Luke tries to assure the merchants that the king was sending reinforcements, but they weren't convinced since it could take weeks for them to arrive, which was enough time to go bankrupt from their businesses. Luke realizes the arguments would go on for hours at this rate, so he decides to play his last part. He tells everyone to shut their pie holes and explains that since he made many contacts in his time as an adventurer, he's tried to get a hold of Conrad. Luke lists heroes like Dustin of the Two Spears, Roy of the Beast Prairies, Travis of the Black Bay Ridge, and Theodore the Dragon Slayer. Sylvia asks Merida if she's
Golden
ever heard
Pig
of those
Cave
names
has
before,
been
so
closed.
She explains that they're all adventuring elites in the rankings. Luke explains that the first thing his friends would do when they arrive is hire novice adventurers to help. So he tells the men this is a rare opportunity to get exposure to high-level adventurers and asks if they want the opportunity to slip away. Luke reminds Merida that till the reinforcements arrive, The guild will need adventurers to keep watch on the 5th level of the dungeon, so Merida plays along and Luke adds that they'll be given special access to the high-level adventurers. Immediately, the men gather around to sign up for the mission with Merida, while Luke heaves a sigh of relief. After, Sylvia hands Luke a glass of water and says she's never seen him look so down. Luke explains that he didn't want to rely on his old contacts as they'd have gotten ahead in life and probably see him as a headache. Sylvia immediately tells Luke that even if he used to be as useless and annoying as gum stuck on the bottom of a shoe, they still need him now. She encourages him to feel proud enough to boast to his friends, as he's done a great deal for their town and he's loved. Luke agrees but can't help but feel like he can't move on without shaking off his past, but he also can't say goodbye to adventuring entirely. At this, Sylvia explains that many people come to their town feeling burdened and end up living with a little spring in their step. This is because when you can't move forward, it's important to stand still. If you do, you might see things from a different perspective, and the answers might even find you. Luke thanks Sylvia for the advice, saying her smile makes everything better when he suddenly hears his name. The merchants rally around Luke, thanking him for helping them with business, while the adventurers ask him for stories about the RNGers. Luke then realizes that this is no time for him to brood. Instead, he needs to do his best to help the people of the town. How will Luke use his new powers to confront the evil Elf King? To find out, comment, E-Rankers aren't so bad. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. And as always, thanks for watching.
In the Japanese countryside where there were lots of rice fields, a man quit his job and started farming in a small town. After finishing tending to some eggplants, Jin Mita could tell it was time to harvest. He left the greenhouse and headed to check the rice fields. In one of the rice fields, a bird noticed something unusual in the mud, a blonde girl wearing armor. Normally, rice fields are home to snails and tadpoles with birds preying on them. So when Jin saw something shiny in his rice field, he thought someone had illegally dumped something there. He quickly ran to catch the culprit. However, his surprise was beyond words when he discovered a collapsed female knight instead. The girl moaned in pain, and Jin wondered how a foreign cosplayer ended up in the countryside. Trying to wake her up, he was relieved as the female knight slowly regained consciousness. Taking a closer look, he noticed her fair skin, long golden hair, and clear emerald eyes. Jin had never seen such beauty before. He had asked the girl if she understood him. The girl got flustered, wondering who Jin was, and told him to stay away. Jin couldn't believe it. He was the one being treated suspiciously when it was his property that had been trespassed. The girl wondered where she was and who Jin was again. Jin got angry since he should be the one asking questions. He explained that they were on his rice field and asked what the girl was doing on his property. The confused girl looked around and was visibly surprised. Jin noticed that the girl hadn't come on her own volition and realized it was not good to get involved with her. Jin walked away, telling the girl not to trespass and bother other people. The girl stopped him and asked for the name of the place. Jin got confused and wondered if the girl was still half asleep. Seeing the girl serious, Jin told her that they were in Japan. The girl got confused since she hadn't heard of such a country. Now Jin was more confused and wondered if the girl was alright. He then asked for the girl's name and where she came from. The girl introduced herself as Seraphim Statfeld, the eldest daughter of the Knight family serving the kingdom of Pahoria. Upon hearing her words, Jin became really confused. He had never heard such words before. Seraphim was shocked because their kingdom was a major power and even a farmer would know about it. Jin claimed he didn't, and he wondered if Seraphim was one of those cosplayers who were into role-playing just like in anime. Seraphim felt offended upon hearing unfamiliar words and couldn't believe a mere farmer dared to mock a knight. As Seraphim tried to unsheath her sword, she stopped and wobbled. She realized that due to the continuous subjugation, she hadn't been able to sleep lately. She slowly closed her eyes and fell unconscious. Leaving her under the blazing sun was a no-no, so Jin didn't have a choice but to do something. Seraphim woke up to a lovely scene surrounded by unfamiliar creature sounds, flowing water and rustling grass. Jin was carrying her, and when they reached a fancy Japanese house, he sighed in relief. Seraphim asked where they were, and Jin said it was his place. He told her to rest, but soon asked her to get off because her armor was too heavy. Jin then noticed how weighty the armor was, thinking it was just for cosplay. He marveled at Seraphim's strength as she effortlessly jumped over a tall wall, making him realize how impressive cosplayers are these days. Seraphim marveled at the size of the house.
Alright, I'm gonna tap this, and I'm gonna go use the restroom. Oh my god! Alright. Damn. Twas not a one tap this time.
Surong make armor as turty as my shell. Hokyung's blades are totally ineffective against them. You wanna borrow my...
What time is it?
Jin led her to. He urged her to go inside, and when she saw the interior, she was surprised that a farmer could own such a fancy house. Jin explained that it was just an ordinary house you could find anywhere. Despite her doubts, Seraphim entered, but Jin quickly cautioned her to remove her shoes and dirty armor. Now without her armor, Seraphim looked around, and Jin couldn't help but notice how much she resembled a foreign celebrity. Taking note of how wet she was, Jin suggested she take a bath, leaving Seraphim astonished. She couldn't believe a farmer's house would have a bath. Jin, slightly irritated, asserted that he was not poor and proceeded to fill the tub with hot water. Seraphim was impressed and asked about the magic tool on the wall, which turned out to be just a water heater according to Jin. She was surprised to find such advanced tools in a farmer's house, and even tried the nearby faucet, accidentally turning on the shower and getting her clothes wet. Jin scolded her for playing around, and Seraphim admitted she had never seen such things before. Jin was confused, assuming that even foreigners should know these basic things. Puzzled by Seraphim's reactions, Jin wondered about her previous life. He asked again, and Seraphim genuinely apologized, asking him to teach her. Jin couldn't believe someone was asking him to teach them how to take a bath. He realized Seraphim was not lying and offered to get her some clothes and a towel. Grateful, Seraphim asked Jin to call her Sarah and thanked him for his help. Seeing her expression, Jin blushed and decided to think things over later, as Sarah didn't seem like a bad person at all. Sarah looked around and took off her clothes. After undressing, she stepped into the bath and tried out the shower. Eventually, she got used to it and decided to take a dip in the bathtub. As she started to feel relaxed, a sudden drip of water caught her by surprise. It was then that she noticed the window and enjoyed the pleasant view. Meanwhile, Jin Mita, a 29-year-old man with no prior girlfriend experience, struggled to choose clothes for Sarah. The best option he had was his tracksuit. He delivered the tracksuit and a towel to the dressing room. Suddenly, Sarah came out from the bath, completely naked and defenseless. The two locked eyes until Sarah let out a loud scream. Jin quickly exited and apologized, explaining that he hadn't intended to peek.
Garmouth.
Sarah eventually calmed down and assured Jin that
5
she
minutes.
knew he had no ill intentions. Jin was relieved, and Sarah told him to forget about it. Jin then reminded her about the towel and clothes. Shortly after, Sarah showed up in the living room, catching Jin off guard. Jin then saw Sarah fresh out of the bath, wearing his old clothes. Sarah thanked him for the comfy outfit. Jin was surprised to see the unfashionable tracksuit looking stylish on Sarah. Sarah sat across from Jin, and he noticed the melons in front of him. Trying not to make it obvious that he noticed them, Jin suggested they eat something. Sarah hesitated to refuse his offer, but then her stomach rumbled, embarrassing her. Deciding to cook, Jin found only leftover miso soup and marinated veggies. Adding some eggs, he started cooking. Sarah, hearing the sounds of his cooking, offered to help, but Jin insisted she relax as his guest. He assured her he was just making simple dishes, and soon the savory aroma filled the room. Jin plated the heated miso and finished cooking the rice. Sarah endured her growling stomach until Jin returned with various simple dishes, surprising her. She wondered if it was okay to eat such fancy food, but Jin explained it was just leftovers. Suddenly, Sarah's expression changed and she questioned whether she should use her hands to eat. Jin suggested chopsticks, realizing it might be challenging for a foreigner. He then got a knife and fork, and Sarah thanked him. Jin wondered why Sarah, despite speaking Japanese, wasn't familiar with Japanese cuisine. Finding her a mystery, Jin began eating, and Sarah felt confused about Jin's words. He clarified that it was like a prayer to express gratitude for the food. Sarah was surprised to learn about this custom and followed suit. Jin was amazed by Sarah's beauty. When she asked about the white grain, Jin explained it was rice he had harvested from fields similar to where Sarah had collapsed. Initially curious, she took a spoonful of rice and found it delicious, much to Jin's joy. Jin suggested trying it with other dishes, and Sarah happily paired it with sautéed eggplant. Pleased with the combination, she continued enjoying the meal. Jin was happy to see her savoring the food. Sarah then tasted the miso soup and found it delightful, with Jin confirming her observation. The soup brought her comfort. Reflecting on the moment, Jin realized it had been years since he had shared a
Garmouth.
meal with someone.
Spawning
The two
in
finished their
3
meal, and
minutes.
Sarah enjoyed some tea. Then she realized something and asked for Jin's name. Jin introduced his full name, but Sarah misunderstood it as one whole name. Jin explained what his surname and given name were. Surprised, Sarah wondered if Jin was a noble, but Jin clarified that nobles don't exist in Japan and everyone has surnames. Sarah was confused. Jin then wondered how long Sarah would keep acting as a female knight. Sarah exclaimed that she was not pretending and was a real knight. However, Jin was distracted by a grain of rice stuck to her mouth. Sarah cleaned her face, and Jin was unsure what to do. He sat down and asked where Sarah came from. Sarah explained that she was in the forests of Suiga region in the Laforia kingdom. Seeing Jin confused, Sarah decided to give a proper explanation. However, Jin pointed out that there was another grain of rice on her face. In the forest of the Suiga region, a bunch of monsters once confronted a team of knights. Sarah stood watch, shielding her wounded teammates. Seeing their exhaustion, Sarah clenched her teeth and bravely attacked the monsters. Startled, her teammates watched as she urged them to retreat while she drew the monsters away. Sarah separated from her team, leading the monsters to a different area. She fought tirelessly until she became weary. She couldn't remember where she passed out, but she eventually woke up in the middle of Jin's rice field. In the present moment, Jin listened to everything, but he couldn't grasp any of it. Sarah suggested that advanced magic might have caused her to be relocated. Jin, however, was certain that Swig or Leforia wasn't real, but Sarah disagreed. Concerned for her squad mates, Sarah expressed worry. Jin tried to find a solution and remembered the map. Sarah thought it might be another magic tool, but Jin explained it was a common information tool in the modern era. Jin then showed Sarah the world map. Surprised, Sarah pointed out that the Leforia kingdom wasn't on it. Jin noticed her reaction and Sarah silently stood up, leaving Jin confused. Before leaving, Sarah thanked Jin for everything. Jin had tried to ask where she was going as Sarah put on her armor again. She said she was going back to her kingdom to meet up with her friends. Jin tried to stop her, but Sarah quickly jumped away. Jin was left speechless. Sarah said she wouldn't forget the favor and left in a hurry, leaving a cloud of dust behind like a charging bull. Jin was shocked because what Sarah did wasn't something normal for cosplayers anymore. Jin thought about Sarah's stories and decided to forget them since Sarah had already left. Jin then looked at the time and suddenly remembered that he needed to deliver the produce to a wholesaler. Jin had gone to his greenhouse to gather some produce. Despite finding Sarah's cosplay odd, he chose to push those thoughts aside. While harvesting, he noticed a cucumber that triggered thoughts of Sarah's sword, but he quickly reminded himself to forget about her. Later, at dusk, Jin delivered his harvest to the wholesaler and headed home. During the drive, he realized that the day had left him more exhausted than usual. Planning to end the night with some beer, he had to abruptly stop his car to avoid hitting someone. Annoyed, he scolded the person, only to discover it was Sarah. Observing her blank and then sad expression, Jin parked and approached her. With tears in her eyes, Sarah noticed Jin. He inquired if she had found what she was looking for, and she revealed she couldn't locate the kingdom, earning surprised looks from others. Jin agreed,
Garmouth,
noting her
explain
unusual
now.
attire. Despite her earlier energy, he saw a lingering sadness in Sarah's expression. Recalling her earlier story, he pondered if Sarah might be from another world. Sarah, confused, prompted Jin to explain. He shared his difficulty believing her fantastical tale, but Sarah insisted she wasn't lying, her expression filled with sorrow. Convinced of her honesty, Jin speculated that she might truly come from another world, citing her lack of knowledge about the modern world as a compelling reason. Despite the incredulity of the idea, Sarah had been surprised and chuckled.
I'll be right back.
chuckled a bit, struggling to believe she had been thrown into another world. She understood that the place was very different from where she came from. She then thanked Jin for trusting her words. The two fell into an awkward silence until Jin suggested Sarah come to his house since it was getting late. Sarah agreed, and Jin drove home with Sarah sitting in the back. Luckily, the road wasn't bumpy, and the night drive continued while Sarah gazed at the night sky. Upon reaching home, Sarah calmed down and decided to sleep early. Jin noticed that Sarah was trying not to show her confusion. He admired how resilient she was. If it were him in her shoes, he would have burst into tears. Sometime after, Rin tried to bring hot water for Sarah but found her quietly crying in a corner. Sarah did her best not to make any noise as tears streamed down her face. Jin decided to give Sarah some space and left her alone for a while. Jin then went to the kitchen and decided to prepare something tasty for the next day. He suddenly remembered how much Sarah enjoyed the miso soup, finding it comforting. Jin marinated fish with koji salted soy sauce, another dish Sarah had liked earlier. Recalling how grateful Sarah had been, he acknowledged he couldn't make anything extravagant, so he decided to prepare a Japanese-style breakfast to recharge Sarah's life point. Morning arrived and Sarah awoke with her hair messy, realizing she'd unintentionally dozed off. Recollecting the events from the day before, anxiety crept in once more. Taking deep breaths, she reminded herself not to dwell on it. Opening the window, she was greeted by a beautiful sight that left her in awe. Just then, a delightful aroma reached her, making her stomach growl. Meanwhile, Jin was getting breakfast ready. Sarah appeared unexpectedly, catching him off guard. Jin realized it had been a while since someone greeted him in the morning. He directed Sarah on where to place the glass he had left near her room. Noticing Sarah's slightly cheerful demeanor, Jin couldn't help but smile. Together they set the table, with Jin finishing up the rice. Miso soup and chopped green onions were added as garnish, completing the Japanese-style breakfast. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the breakfast. Jin was happy that his plan had worked to cheer up Sarah. They then ate, and Sarah began with a cherry tomato. She enjoyed the taste and even shared her thoughts. Sarah thought it was a fruit, but Jin corrected her, saying it was a vegetable. Sarah was surprised at how delicious vegetables could be. Jin explained that they were vegetables that couldn't be sold, but Sarah thought they looked great nonetheless. Next, Sarah tried the fish and found the smell pleasant. She had never tasted such fatty fish before. The rice was also something new to her, and she enjoyed it a lot. Then she had the miso soup, which she found delicious and soothing. Sarah then mentioned she had never eaten a fish that didn't have a strong fish odor before. Jin explained it was salmon and wondered if they also ate fish in her world. Sarah explained they had a fish called a donko. It was common and cheap, but it had a muddy and persistent raw odor. Jin realized it must be unappetizing, judging by Sarah's expression. Just when Jin found the otherworldly fish interesting, Sarah groaned and wore a disgusted look. She was embarrassed that she couldn't eat salmon cleanly. Jin agreed, mentioning that it was challenging to eat fish with a fork. As a knight, Sarah felt ashamed of herself. Jin had asked for Sarah's plate, and with his chopsticks, he divided the salmon so she could eat it easily. However, Sarah wasn't focused on the fish. Instead, her attention was on Jin's chopsticks. Jin decided to teach her, starting with the gun finger hand position, which Sarah found strange. He then explained how to hold the chopsticks, and Sarah managed to learn. However, handling the fish proved challenging for her. Jin suggested practicing with cucumbers, and Sarah succeeded. Unfortunately, the cucumber didn't make it to her mouth and fell. Jin burst into laughter, and Sarah began to pout. He reassured her, saying she'd improve with practice. Upon hearing Jin's encouragement, Sarah flinched and glanced outside. Realizing he had made a mistake, Jin apologized. He pondered if there was a way for Sarah to return to her original world, since she didn't know how she ended up in this world. Sarah speculated that some magical power might have sent her, but she found no traces of magic in Jin's rice field. Jin realized that Sarah had been investigating on her own. Sarah had assured Jin not to worry, saying she had already made up her mind to live in his world. She insisted she was skilled in combat and could easily handle tasks like dealing with monsters such as orcs or goblins to make a living. Jin then explained to Sarah that there were no monsters on Earth, and Japan was one of the safest countries globally. He even mentioned that professions like being a knight didn't exist. Sarah was surprised and concerned about how she would manage to live alone. Despite the unexpected and disheartening news, Sarah decided to search for a job involving hard work or manual labor. Upon hearing this, Jin remembered how Sarah had displayed superhuman abilities the other day. However, he knew that in this world, someone without a family registry might face difficulties in finding a job. Jin could only picture Sarah working in the underground world, but he was worried because she was a girl. Sarah had thanked Jin for the breakfast and attempted to leave on her own. Jin couldn't believe she was rushing things too much. He tried to stop her, but Sarah had already planned to start her own night order, gather mages from Earth, and find a way home. As Sarah left through the front door, Jin began to imagine her falling into the dark side. Suddenly, he had an idea. He asked Sarah to live with him. Sarah looked back with an expectant expression. Jin, realizing he sounded like he was proposing, was taken aback. Sarah approached him, questioning if it was really okay to stay with him. Jin, a bit flustered, mentioned that he couldn't offer a high salary and the work would be physically demanding. Sarah agreed as long as she had a place to stay and food to eat. Her face lit up with joy. And Jin realized he could use an extra pair of hands on his farm. He decided to hire Sarah, and the female knight was grateful. For some reason, Jin felt relieved, and that marked the beginning of his cohabitation with a female knight from another world. 3 days earlier, Sarah had her first day helping Jin with farming. However, Jin noticed that Sarah still had her sword with her. She seemed uneasy without it. Jin thought it wasn't a good idea, but Sarah felt comfortable having it. Jin decided to let it be, but reminded her about the Japanese law, which stated that blades longer than 6 centimeters should not be carried around. Sarah was curious about the length and compared it to a kitchen knife. As they worked, Sarah realized how peaceful and free of monsters the earth was. Jin then cautioned her not to casually draw her sword. Jin guided Sarah around until they reached the greenhouse. Inside, Sarah was impressed by the long and healthy eggplants. She marveled at their quality. Jin explained to Sarah how a greenhouse worked, telling her how it could help grow plants even when they weren't in season. Sarah couldn't help but be impressed. Jin learned that Sarah came from a world that seemed like the Middle Ages. Sarah found a long eggplant, and Jin began discussing the different kinds of eggplants.
Best
that could be
viewers
grown.
on Streambonet
Sarah
remove
looked
the
at
space
Jin and pointed out how he
SE8K.
always became talkative when it came to vegetables. Jin wondered if that was true, and Sarah claimed that he always wore a stone-faced expression. Sarah realized that Jin loved being a farmer. Jin denied it, but Sarah continued to compare him to her being addicted to her sword. Jin had brought out a cart with baskets, catching Sarah's interest. He then explained to Sarah how to harvest the eggplants using a pair of scissors, pointing out which parts to cut to prevent the plants from growing out of control. Nervously, Sarah gave it a try, touching a big, smooth eggplant. Following Jin's instructions, she snipped it off. Suddenly, Jin shouted, startling Sarah. Worried she had made a mistake, Sarah was almost teary-eyed. Jin reassured her, laughing and claiming it was fine, just his way of keeping things relaxed. This angered Sarah, and she started to unsheath her sword. In the end, Jin apologized. As the basket started to fill up, Sarah noticed Jin working really fast. Jin explained he had been doing the same thing for years. Determined, Sarah declared she could be just as fast as Jin. Jin, initially worried about living with a new female knight, couldn't help but have fun watching Sarah act clumsily. The eggplants had been harvested and neatly arranged in baskets, which deeply impressed Sarah. Wondering about the next steps, she asked Jin, who explained that they needed to sort the eggplants before sending them out. However, he suggested taking a break for lunch first. Back at home, Sarah eagerly anticipated what Jin would prepare. He decided to make tomato penne with eggplant and tuna. Excited to help, Sarah was handed a peeler by Jin, who casually taught her how to use it. Trying it herself, Sarah found the peeler to be quite handy. Meanwhile, Jin prepared the tuna and started a fire. Sarah complimented Jin on his cooking skills, expressing surprise at a man being so adept in the kitchen. Jin credited his proficiency to years of living alone. Curious about cultural differences, he asked Sarah if it was the same in her world. She explained that in her world, it was considered unmanly for men to cook, and it was typically a task for women. After Sarah finished peeling the vegetables, she asked Jin what to do next. Jin instructed her to cut them diagonally. Since Sarah didn't understand, Jin showed her with a demonstration and explained the concept of cutting diagonally. Excited, Sarah grabbed the kitchen knife, but Jin quickly warned her about the dangerous way she was holding it. Confused, Sarah turned around and asked Jin for guidance on the proper way to hold the knife. Jin was surprised, realizing that Sarah might not have much experience in cooking. Sarah apologized, revealing that she came from a knight's family and had focused on swordplay and horse riding since childhood. She hadn't mentioned it earlier because she was afraid of being kicked out of the kitchen, expressing her genuine desire to learn how to cook. Feeling Sarah's sincerity, Jin sighed and proceeded to demonstrate the correct way to hold the knife, adding some complaints like an old man. During the lesson, their hair accidentally brushed against each other, and Jin apologized.